All right. Shane, how you doing, man?
Great. What about you, Shannon?
I'm good. I'm good. The weather's changing, you know, back to normal.
And the
That's
Yellow Jackets are buzzing, right?
the Yellow Jackets, they're angry, man. They're like, our food supply is running out. So, they're getting more aggressive,
The food
you know.
supply's running out, so they're running after you.
Yeah, I'm trying to avoid that. Trying to avoid that. So I just stay in the house and shut the window, you know. Stay, stay cooped up, man. You know. Uh, but speaking of that, since I've been cooped up, I thought about uh what we've kind of gone over in glanced over in over time, through our discussions, offline, and that's been about the Reformation and Protestantism. So I thought we could just kind of talk a little bit about, um, in particular, we've talked about the Reformation in terms of mainland Europe and England, before, um, but just to kind of hone in and have a sort of a
Mhm.
focus for our conversation, I thought maybe we talk more about the English Reformation and you know and that whole transition, and what took place there. So first, I want to start off by talking about England within the Catholic Church. So how it was, and where it stood within the Catholic Church before we get to talking about the Reformation. Um, you had talked about one time that um, that England was seen it had a very important um, relationship to the Blessed Mother, right? And that it had called itself, it saw itself as being uh, the dowry of Mary,
The yeah the, yeah the yeah Mary's dowry, and
Mary's dowry, right?
sort of like how the nickname of France was the first daughter of the church.
Hmm,
It,
hmm.
it's a lot like that.
Okay,
And
yeah,
yeah, and English piety was known, really, prior to the English Reformation, and even afterward, in many cases, um i- traditional English piety is known as being very very simple,
hmm,
and very into the beauty of nature. And when I
hmm.
say simple, I don't mean like, I don't mean like simpletons. I mean like simple in the sense of being undistracted. Like
Right,
being very very focused.
right. A sense of like, I guess you want, like a humility,
Yes, yeah.
and yeah,
Well,
not
and you can even bring in the language to this too. English, in comparison to like Latin or Greek,
mhm,
or a lot of the other Romance languages, English is a very, it's kind of a patchwork, but
mhm.
English, especially Old English, is a very simplistic, it's a very simplistic language in comparison to many other languages. Like
Right.
it's and I know one interesting thing about English, is that English has always had a different. So it's weird because as far as feelings go, that there's only one way to express love in English, which is the word love.
Mhm,
But the English have multiple ways of referring to the same food. You know,
mhm,
like in another language, if you're eating lamb, you would say that you're just eating lamb, right?
mhm, mhm.
But in English, if you're eating lamb, what is it you say you're eating? You're eating
Um, um,
oh, I'm trying to
I
think
know
of,
what
oh,
you're. Yeah, I know what you're. Yeah.
but all right, so actually a better example of this would be if you are eating, so if you're eating the meat of a cow, you're eating beef.
Right. Right.
But if it, but in another language,
Mutton. Is it mutton?
mutton,
Is
yes, yeah,
right.
mutton.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
and you find that a lot in English, where you have a lot of words to express like the things that you would consume,
Yeah.
like in foods and things, but then it's not very expressive whenever it comes to like to the sense to the to internals sentimentality. I guess more to the imminent, to the to those feelings that upwell from the inside out. Yeah,
Right.
it's
Yeah.
it's kind of a one trick pony as far as that stuff goes, but yeah,
Right.
so English has always been a very simple, a very simple language, and the piety of the English was always very simple and very undistracted. And you can even see that in the English contributions to the sciences.
Mm-hmm.
They're very now this would be an example of the English gone bad, which I'm going to go ahead and just lay it out there. I've got a little bit of a bias against the English because
Okay.
half of my ancestry is Irish, and we had to flee.
Right.
We had to flee our island because we were starved by the Brits.
Right. We
So
understand.
yeah,
There's some grievance.
yeah. So there's a little bit of grievance here. Um, but as far as like the English contributions to philosophy, you had the English were really were the first radical empiricists,
Mm-hmm.
which empiricists say that the only way that you can know any truth is if you see it in front of you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like
Right.
that's essentially what it is.
Right.
Now that is a
The
that's a
first
very
doubting, the first doubting Thomases, right? Unless
yeah
I see.
and that's a very simplistic way of thinking. Yeah, like to basically say the only things I think are real are things that I see. If I don't see it, it ain't real. Yeah, like that is a very but
Right.
that's a very and I am oversimplifying this a
Mm-hmm.
bit
Yeah.
in the in a very English way. I'm simplifying it, but that is so if you think about English philosophy, it's very empiricist.
Mm-hmm.
After the Reformation, if you look at English sciences, it's really interesting because there's this deep-seated English attachment to nature.
Okay. Yes.
That's very particular to the English, this association with the garden, and this association with finding God through the natural revelation,
Mm-hmm.
through the beauty of nature. That's a very English notion, and it's really interesting that one of the most moving that one of the most predominant movements in recent English history was the movement of Darwin.
Mm-hmm.
Which the movement of Darwin is based upon observing the natural,
Right.
and tapping into that empiricist,
Right.
recent British tradition. Yeah, it's really interesting that there is a very deep seated Englishness there.
Mm-hmm.
That makes them very different from the French and from the Italians and from the Spanish and even
Mm-hmm.
from the Germans. And what the thing I would like to point out is that the English just have they just have a much simpler philosophical tradition. They have a very they're a lot simpler as far as a lot
Yeah.
of that stuff goes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I understand. I understand the grievance. But for me, uh, I would say, the Anglo-Saxon, tradition of nature and the garden and stuff. That does. I'm sympathetic towards that. I do like that sort of simple. You know, like being in the Shire.
Mhm.
Like you like Lord of the
Yes.
Rings.
Yep.
You know, um, it's I would say it's comforting. It's
Very.
comforting. Yeah, and it's peaceful and pleasant, and um, especially given what we're going through now on a social cultural level, on a political level. we all want to. We all wish we could. We all wish we could be in the Shire right now. We all wish we could be in the garden instead of heading towards Mordor and the Eye of Sauron, bro.
It would have been really nice if the English would have stayed in their shires and not have crossed over the not have crossed over the Irish Sea
Right,
and run the Irish out of their home. But I guess that's a tale for another day.
right. That's a tale for another day. But you know, okay, so that takes us back to okay, now I pulled it up here on the Wikipedia, and I know people, especially on the right, Wikipedia is uh is being taken by the left, they're biased, but you know what? We're just gonna it's simple. And if you wanna get into it yourself, you always can go off and
Well,
read other
well,
things.
and this is one of the things I always say is if you're a lefty, then
Yeah.
and you want to make a really convincing argument and you really want to be sure that you're right, if you can get a Fox News article to back what you're arguing, then you're
Right,
probably onto something.
right, right,
That's objectively
right,
true. If you're somebody on the right
right.
and you can grab like a CNN article or
Yeah,
appeal to Wikipedia or something, and that's backing what you're saying,
yeah.
then you're definitely onto something.
Right, right, right. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I'm onto something here, but I'll try it anyways. And we talk about, when we talk about the dowry of Mary, right? It says here, the dowry of Mary, or dowry of the Virgin, Our Lady's dowry, and similar variations, is a title used in Catholic context to refer to England. It dates back to medieval times and had become widespread by the middle of the 14th century. It reflects the deep devotion to Mary that existed in medieval England and the belief that she took a particular protective interest in the country's affairs. Um, Early use, the title originated in the medieval period when devotion to the Virgin Mary in England was particularly strong. It was believed that England belonged in some special way to Mary, who was seen as the country's protectress, and who, through her powers of intercession, acted as the country's defender or guardian. Um, so, I mean, obviously, England had a very strong um sense of piety, and
Mhm.
faith, and and regarded the Blessed Mother as very important to its England, um, obviously pre-Reformation, pre-Protestant, uh, had a very, you know, um, had great devotion to the Blessed Mother, right? And also, uh, took took its devotion to the Blessed Mother very seriously in the sense of its national identity, right? And also, there were a lot of monasteries in England, like, in fact, this is something I learned, uh, you know, and I don't remember all the details of it, but it's really fascinating. Like, I think it's Westminster Abbey, uh, where the where the where the kings and queens are crowned now.
Yep.
In these days, um, used to be an I think it used to be a monastery for the I may be getting this wrong. So some of my English historians and lovers of English history and everything, you can correct me. It's okay. I welcome it. Uh, you know, that it used to be a Dominican. It was the caretakers of the abbey were Dominican. Was the Dominican order,
Okay.
and they and they also were heavily involved in, I think, the coronation process, and things of that, like that, when kings would be crowned, and the caretakers of the abbey and stuff like that. But anyways, I just say that to say, for those who think that England wasn't heavily, you know, um, you know, heavily involved with this Catholic identity, you know, I think they're wrong, right? England was very, very Catholic. Um, you know.
Well. In fact, I've got a. So there were the acts of. So they called them the acts of supremacy, and then that was followed by the dissolution of the monasteries
Mm,
in England,
mm,
by King Henry VIII.
mm,
And there's a historian, George W. Bernard, who talks about religious life
mm,
in England, like in the in he's talking specifically about the late 1530s.
mm,
So this is a quote from him in one of his writings. He says, "The dissolution of the monasteries in the late 1530s was one of the most revolutionary events in English history.
mm,
There were nearly 900 religious houses in England, around 260 for monks, 300 for regular canons, 142 nunneries, and 183 friaries, some 12,000 in total,
mm,
4,000 monks, 3,000 canons, 3,000 friars, and 2,000 nuns. If the adult male population was 500,000, that meant that one adult man in every 50 was in a religious order of some kind.
mm, mm.
So
Yeah.
that just goes to show you how devout that country was.
Mm,
And
mm.
and then um and then it's really interesting to note that there's a book called Stripping of the Altars by Eamon Duffy. It's
Okay.
really well written. Eamon Duffy, I think he's one of the most preeminent English historians alive right now,
Mm,
specifically on the English Reformation. And
okay.
I don't know what university he's a professor at.
Mm,
I don't know if he's American. I think he's British, but
okay.
I don't remember where he is out of.
Mm,
But he might be British and he might be at Yale or Princeton or something, or he's over at Oxford or something like that. Anyway, he talks in that book Stripping of the Altars about what English piety was like prior to the English Reformation.
mm,
Really what English piety, like how it developed and everything. And he talks about how when the wealthy would die, they would leave their accumulated lands and possessions behind
mm,
for the common use of those people, of the people in the community.
mm,
And
mm,
the only thing that they would ask in return, and this is not only for the wealthy that had died, but also for the wealthy that were living. The only thing that they would ask for in return
mm,
would be for those that were poor, for those that were not as well off as they were, for those that were suffering, even to keep them in their prayers.
mm,
That
mm.
that was the only request that they had.
Yeah.
This evidence is actually, it's pretty extensive, and
Wow.
you don't see that in most of the Christian world today. I mean, you don't see that in most Protestant, Catholic, or Orthodox circles. Yeah, you don't see that kind of piety ingrained into the baked into the cake.
Right.
Uh, yeah. So
But okay, so now before we move on to to talking more in depth about the Reformation, King Henry VIII, and all that, just to bring it home with this, what makes you think that you know what what why do you think that the English has such a pious attitude towards things? I mean, is it because they were such a maybe removed, that there was it was an island, maybe economic reasons, or just
you,
when.
it's that's a really a really interesting question to ask.
Mhm.
I think it's probably multiple things. One, that was the frontier of the Roman Empire, you know?
Okay. Mhm.
So so the whole Latin Roman way of thinking, even Greek way of thinking, which is really, the whole, Latin and Greek ways of thinking are kind of, they're very different, but they're also very similar. They're kind of two sides of the same coin.
Right.
The England being at the frontier
Mhm.
made them more in tune with kind of like the cyclical way of viewing the world, like, the patterns and see, or like natural patterns and seasons, and
Mhm.
looking more toward the beauty of what exists in nature rather than the beauty of what man's hand can craft.
Mhm.
Like, kind of in the soul there, and then the Irish are just like the better version of that, you know,
Yes. Okay.
of that non-Romanized frontier.
Right. Right. Okay. I see what you mean. There's a, yeah. I mean,
Like, when you look at Rome, or
Mhm.
when you look at Latin Christianity and you look at Greek Christianity,
Mhm.
you're looking at Christianities that really developed. Um, I mean, that developed everywhere. I mean,
Mhm.
don't get me wrong, but they were really spearheaded in urban centers.
Right. Right.
And
Yes.
not exclusively, but
Right.
like the bishops would normally reside in Rome, or they would
Right.
reside in Alexandria, or they would
Right.
reside in Constantinople,
Right.
or in Jerusalem. They would
Right.
exist in a city.
Right.
Um, England being the frontier,
Mhm.
was I would guess that it being rural,
Mhm.
um that probably had an impact on the faith developing a little bit differently there.
Right. Right. A more
Not that it was
quiet.
totally, yeah, not that it's totally
Yeah.
different. It's just that different aspects of the faith or characteristics would be emphasized there that were not emphasized in the more Latin or Greek places.
Right.
And with that being said, you can think about it that the Latin and Greek places had more of an intellectual tradition that they were standing on, more of an
Right.
intellectual foundation that they would stand upon. Where
Right.
they were asking hard questions.
Right.
They would, the Latin and Greek fathers would both look back at Aristotle, and would look back
Right. Saint
at
Augustine.
Socrates. Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Yes.
and Saint Augustine would hail back to those people.
Yeah.
But in England, they were just closer to the land,
Mhm.
and closer to gardens.
Right.
They would rather spend time in a garden and farming than they would reading Aristotle. Now,
Right.
obviously, Saint Augustine went to, or I believe Saint Augustine was instrumental in evangelizing to the English,
Wow. Okay.
initially.
Mhm.
I could be wrong. I could be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure that it
Yeah.
was Saint Augustine was one of the people that spearheaded it.
Yeah.
So
I
he
think
was
he had it.
definitely there.
Yeah. I think if nothing else, I think he had a pupil that was like from the British
Yes.
Isles that spent time with him. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So okay. So now, do you think in turn then, this, for the same reason that England was so, and the British Isles are so on the frontier, do you think, because you could, some people might say, well, the Germanic tribes were on the frontier too, right? They were on the Rhine, right? And that's a whole nother story,
Hmm.
but the Germans, and the various Germanic tribes, they were on the frontier of the Roman Empire too. And so, do you think that being on the frontier, and also maybe not being as 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 traditionally a part of the Greco-Roman or Latin um, uh, sphere of influence would have something to do with their their rebelliousness, or they're wanting to break away from the church, or is it, or should we simply leave it at it was King Henry VIII. He used to be a very good Catholic, you know, very into theology at a young age, right?
Well, and he had defended he had written a book refuting Martin Luther,
Yeah,
and he defended the papacy, communion of saints.
right.
He defended all of the sacraments
Yeah.
and everything in the church. He
Hmm. Hmm. But
he was a very smart guy.
yeah,
Henry VIII was.
right, right. So now, you know, should we chalk it up to it was just King Henry VIII, and he just went he just something he had a glitch, and something just went haywire, or should we say that the English world, is Germanic in its I mean, it is Germanic. I mean, as far as a language, right? It's a
Mhm.
it's a Germanic language, um, but the culture, the medieval culture, the culture that surrounds the monarchy and everything is very francophone, very Norman, right? Very um, rooted in a French uh, medieval court um, culture. You know what I mean? Same thing you could say, and this is just side note. Same thing you could say for like the Japanese monarchy and its nobility and court
Mhm.
system is heavily influenced by the Chinese, you know, court and its medieval whatever was going on there, right? So the English culture, even though it's sort of Germanic in its language and its origins, um, its kind of veneer is very Latin, right? Um, so you know, do you think that there's something, say, that's just very deep in the Englishness that sort of is allied to its other Germanic cousins, like the Germans, the Dutch, the Swedes, the Norwegians, what have you?
Well, so I can't really speak to the Germans as much,
Hmm.
because man, they're difficult to figure out, but I think it's interesting how in the German mind it makes a lot of sense to refer to their place in the world like to refer to their polis as being the fatherland
Okay.
in
Okay.
a very masculine sense.
Yeah.
And
Right.
the Brits always perceived their polis as being Britannia.
Okay. Mm.
And you think about the history or of the British crown, of the British
Mm.
monarchy, especially with the suppression of devotions to the Blessed Mother.
Mm.
um their their most fantastic monarchies, or their most fantastic monarchs,
Mm.
that the Brits look back on and say these were our best monarchs. They would point to Queen Elizabeth I, the
Mhm.
Elizabethan era, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
They would point to Queen Victoria,
Right.
the Victorian era, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then they would point to Queen Elizabeth II,
Mhm.
as being another great one. I mean,
Yeah.
she got a hold of Britain as an empire, and she left it off as being not an empire. But
Yeah.
the Brits still view her very fondly, and I think in many ways, the thing that makes the British heart sing. Obviously, I'm not British, but I think in many ways, from an outsider looking in, what makes the British heart sing is having a devotion to a queen who they view as being almost like a universal mother.
Yes. Okay. Okay.
You know,
That's a very interesting. I never. That's very interesting. Yes. Okay.
and you know that it's so interesting that you don't have that in the history of the French monarchs.
Hmm.
Can you name one French monarch that was a female that that a French ear is named after? No. You
Right.
know, you know,
Right.
the Germans were so busy battling one another. I don't think they really had much. I mean, they had what, like Bismarck. You know, they had,
Right. Right.
you know,
Yeah.
and I guess back in the day they had like Charlemagne and stuff. But you
Right.
know, there, and I would argue that there really aren't any other countries in the world, like Britain in that sense,
Hmm.
that when a female sits on their throne,
Hmm.
it makes their country really feel a sense of unity and a sense of direction.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
I think in many ways that's a hail back to their devotion, to the deep seated devotion that they had to the Blessed Mother.
Right. 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 Yeah. That's a very interesting point. I never thought about it like that. Like, yeah, that's something to. I think that's something that maybe a historian of philosophy or philosopher of history should really take up and maybe think about that. That's
Yeah.
that's that's actually remarkable to kind of take that into question. You know, uh, but yeah, going into King Henry, you know, um, you know, the eighth, his whole thing. I mean, there's so many movies and so many documentaries and so many, it's just been run over so many times, right? Like this whole thing about the Boleyns, and I don't know how many wives he actually had, how many mistresses or whatever, right? But this whole thing about the Reformations, usually when they make these documentaries and they make these movies and stuff, they pin it on, the whole thing of him not being able to get rid of or dissolve his marriage with the Queen of Spain, the one of the princesses of Spain. I forget what her name is. Queen Mary of Aragon. I'm not sure. I don't remember.
Um.
But she was a
Oh,
Spanish.
I don't think it wasn't Mary. It was Catherine.
Catherine.
Yeah,
Catherine.
Catherine.
Okay. You know, and and their whole thing, and he wanted to he wanted to was it I don't have that marriage annulled or dissolved or something like that by the Pope, and the Pope denied him that 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 divorce or whatever,
Well,
right?
and in all fairness, what the Pope said was that there was no legitimate reason to annul the marriage because it was a properly ordered marriage that was entered into voluntarily. Both of them were Christians.
Mhm.
There was nothing wrong with the ceremony,
Mhm.
but both entered into it without being forced into it.
Mhm. Mhm.
There were no grounds to annul that marriage.
Right, right, and now, uh, what was his reasons for wanting to? Was it because she couldn't bear him a son, or?
That's what he argued. But I mean,
Mhm.
I guess my question would be today would which today marriage is not really as important as it's not culturally viewed as being the bedrock that it was viewed as being back then.
Mhm.
But even in the climate that we have today regarding marriage, would anybody say, well, that guy wanting to divorce his wife and wanting to abandon her,
Mhm.
um that her not being able to guarantee that he have a male son,
Mhm.
um would that be a legitimate ground for him to divorce her? I mean,
Mhm.
and of course we have no fault divorce in most of the world now, so you can divorce anybody for anything. You don't have to disclose the reason.
Right.
But
I just don't like him no more.
yeah, but the thing is, if he went on to public TV,
Mhm.
like went on to the BBC and said, the reason I'm divorcing her, or the reason I want to divorce her is because I want a son, and
Mhm.
she can't give it to me.
Mhm.
You know, I culturally, I think there would be a big backlash to that because that's
Right.
not a good enough reason. That's not a
Right.
good enough reason to abandon your family.
Right.
You know, and
But
so
the thing is, and you say that, and you say that, and the thing is that that's the whole. All of that is the, sort of the basis on which the Church of England stands, right? Isn't that kind of
yes.
something to think about? Like, yeah, you know,
Well, and you see, and that's the thing though. Henry VIII wrote a defense of
mhm,
he wrote a defense countering Martin Luther,
mhm,
defending the seven sacraments in the Catholic Church. In
mhm,
that he defended, he defended the Pope, he defended all that stuff. I think I mentioned that a little while ago,
mhm,
but I want to reiterate that because we're not dealing with someone here that didn't understand what he was doing, that didn't understand the papacy, who didn't understand what biblical marriage is, who didn't
mhm,
understand the sacraments. He understood them quite well.
mhm,
He understood them very well. It was that, you know, like in many cases, when we fall into sin, we
mhm,
intellectually we know better,
mhm,
but we say it's our will over his will, right?
mhm, mhm,
And
mhm.
so that's honestly, I think that's what happened in the case of Henry VIII.
Right, 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 and so goes the spiraling out of control that took place, sort of in England, and everything,
Well,
and
and then what ended up happening was they called it the Supremacy Act, right? And what the
mhm,
Supremacy Act said was that Henry VIII, or that the monarch of England was the highest ecclesial authority over the British Isle, over the British Isles.
mhm,
It was
mhm,
no longer the Pope, and what that did, it allowed the monarch to grant themselves a divorce anytime they wanted, or and
mhm,
also to order the change in anything liturgical, to order the church to do whatever they wanted. What it did was it elevated, and this is a really important thing,
mhm,
it elevated the state authority
mhm,
over the church, right?
mhm, 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 mhm,
Now, what were the pilgrims? Why did they come to America? Why were they trying to escape England? They didn't want the state to have control over the church.
mhm,
It wasn't that they wanted to escape the power of the church. They wanted to escape the state's assertion that they had exclusive control over the church, which
right,
upends everything because, um, prior to the Reformation, the
mhm,
Reformation in Germany and the Reformation in England,
mhm,
um, the monarch was subject to the code of canon law,
right,
which was universal.
right,
And the code of canon law says, kind of, and again, it kind of builds on Aristotle and stuff, and
mhm,
codified by Thomas Aquinas and everything.
mhm,
But what the code of canon law says is that if you're a monarch and you treat if you cross a particular line
mhm,
in not looking out for the best interests of your people, then
mhm,
your people do have a right to overthrow you.
mhm, mhm,
They
mhm,
have a right not to listen to you.
right,
And the code of
right,
canon law, subsidiarity is in there, which says that
mhm,
any decisions that can be made locally must
mhm,
be made locally.
mhm, mhm,
So the code of canon law, it's the worst nightmare for an authoritarian.
right,
It's the worst
right,
nightmare for someone who wants to make centralized decisions. That's one of the reasons that after the Reformation, you end up seeing this runaway notion of the divine right of kings,
mhm,
where just because they're a king, they have supremacy over all earthly over their entire earthly realm with
mhm,
no limits.
mhm,
And it really, it bred the authoritarian monarchies that led to
mhm,
the end of the monarchies in Europe. Because it
mhm,
was when the English broke the seal, then the French monarchy to, began to disregard canon law.
mhm,
They weren't able to disregard it entirely,
right,
but and the French monarchy was nowhere near as powerful as a lot of people today think it was.
okay, mhm,
Um, but the English kind of broke the seal, you know?
Right. Right. And so that kind of gave permission for
Yeah.
other royal, you know, dynasties
So
or.
so you had the Supremacy Act, right? And
Mhm.
along with that came the dissolution of the monasteries, which remember we just looked at. There were hundreds of monasteries, which really equated to being church property. Now, when we hear church property, we want to think of them as being like big profit centers, like what we would think about as property today. Like we
Right.
think about like a store like Walmart or something.
Right.
These monasteries were not profit centers that were sending their profits back to Rome.
Right.
These monasteries were breweries and mills and centers where they would produce stuff for the community.
Right.
You
Right.
know, and the community was better off because of that.
Right.
Well, what ended up happening was the monasteries got dissolved and
Mhm.
the landed gentry, the aristocracy,
Mhm.
ransacked the property. They
Mhm.
took the brewing equipment, they took the mills, they took
Mhm.
the property, and a lot of the times they would move into the monasteries and even churches and stuff and turn
Mhm.
that into their new castle. Yeah, turn that into their new home.
Right.
And and then what that did was it caused there to be after Henry VIII died,
Mhm.
his daughter Queen Mary took over,
Mhm.
the one who is often called Bloody Mary,
Okay.
but she was actually very merciful
Mhm.
and spilled far less blood than
Mhm.
her sister Queen Elizabeth would end up spilling. I mean, her
Right.
sister Queen Elizabeth, she reigned over a bloodbath.
Right.
Um, but Queen Mary wanted to reconcile with Rome,
Mhm.
and what she ended up running into the problem of there being this aristocratic class who had ransacked the church property,
Mhm.
who had kicked out monks, killed nuns and stuff so that they could steal all the stuff.
Mhm.
And then Queen Mary was asking them to give it back.
Mhm.
Well, they
Mhm.
weren't gonna move out of their new palace.
Right.
That had once been a monastery.
Right.
They weren't going to give back the mill. Yeah,
Right.
that became that mill that was not a profit center before, that was used for the good of the community. Now it has become a profit center for an aristocratic class.
Right.
There's no way in hell that they were going to give that stuff back, and they didn't.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that leads into a lot of the persecutions that took place. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, there and surprisingly enough, I learned that there were a couple of excuse me, there were a couple of aristocratic families who are noted for being persecuted under
Mm-hmm.
um, Queen Elizabeth I. And there's a name that they have for them,
Oh,
like the
I know what you're talking about. I can't think of it.
yeah. Let me see. I'm gonna
Start with an R, I think.
uh let me see. Shoot. Let me think here.
It's like
Uh Let me see.
it's like yeah. I don't remember what it is.
Yeah. Let me see.
But yeah, the
Recusancy. The
the
rec-
the recusants, right? Like
yeah,
that,
the
I think
recusant.
that's what they were called. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And they ended up having to go underground.
Right. 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 Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, man. Okay. I mean, we'll stop there. One thing I will say is this. People say, well, why does all why does this matter? Why should this matter? Well, okay, I can think of one reason, and I'm sure that there are many, right? But think about the Church of England today,
Mhm.
right? And sort of the complications that they're having in terms of their doctrine and where they lie, where their uh, sort of sticking point and standpoints are with certain social and cultural issues that we're having today, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, they they are they seem to be very um, reluctant to push back on a lot of the sort of uh, agendas coming from the far left or from progressive, um, progressive, say theologians, progressive Christians, you know, um, and progressive politicians, right? Um, and they don't have. I think one of the reasons for that is because they don't really have a. Well, they lack a certain tradition and doctrine that's rooted in in uh, in a Christendom that goes all the way back to the apostles, right?
Yeah.
Now that some people might get mad about that, but I do think that really does affect the way that the church goes. And you think about, like, you know um, King Charles now, right? He's King Charles, not no longer Prince Charles.
He's defender of the faiths, right? He's
Right. He's defender of the faiths. He wants to have this sort of inclusionary, thing going on. And I didn't watch the ceremony. Um, and I didn't, see what all that entails. But you know, it, I've heard people criticize it. Um, just it doesn't have the same didn't have the same I think appeal. You know, maybe that's given just due to the times we're in. People are just not into monarchies anymore. But the thing I would say with England is, can you blame them? Because the monarchy is not really standing on a certain,
no.
it's not firm in its sticking points. Like, we're Christian, right? We're going to stand on our Christian faith. This is what we believe. You know, and two, he's always been sort of uh, you know sympathetic towards sort of the global warming thing, the ecology thing. I mean, he's very much into that. And so,
Very much.
yeah, I feel like he's his own worst enemy. You know
Mm-hmm.
what I mean? but you could say that I think the Church of England is his own worst enemy.
Yeah.
It really has.
And we all are,
Yeah, yeah. We all have the ability to be our own worst enemies. But yeah, that's what I would say about sort of the culmination of all of this, right? Like the culmination of, in particular, the English Reformation.
Oh,
You know,
and that's another interesting thing. The title Defender of the Faith
right?
that 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 is that's always passed down to every coronated English monarch.
Mhm.
That title was bestowed upon, I think it might have been bestowed upon Henry VIII by the
Okay.
Pope. I think it was
Okay.
when he defended the church during the time of like against Martin Luther.
Mhm.
Um
Mhm.
and I'm not hating on I don't despise I don't despise Luther.
Mhm.
I think Luther was wrong about a lot of things, but
Right.
I do think I do think he pointed out some very he pointed out a lot of very valid points of corruption that were
Mhm.
going on especially in the church in Germany at the time.
Mhm.
Leave it to the Germans, right? But the Pope bestowed the title Defender of the Faith onto Henry VIII.
Mhm.
and Henry the and it's interesting that the royal family, that they passed that title on um uh at the coronation ceremony, but that title was not meant to be a hereditary title. That title was just meant to be bestowed upon Henry VIII because of his defense of the church
Right.
against Martin Luther, against the invalid claims of Martin Luther, which many of his claims were valid,
Right.
but a lot of his claims were also not valid.
Right. 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 Yeah. There's I think there's a lot to be said about the English, and their ways, and there's a lot of admiration in the sense of, I like the Shire type,
Mhm.
being in the garden, that peaceful quietness. Uh, but then, it's like, man, you went sideways and you messed it all up, bro. No, no, I'm just
Well,
uh,
and I do have to admit, I do like a good shepherd's pie, you know,
right, right. Who doesn't
but
like?
the Irish make a better shepherd's pie than the English could ever make, you know. So
All right, yeah, yeah. I'll leave it there. I'll leave it there. I'll leave it there. Maybe we'll put a recipe down for the Irish shepherd's pie and
yes,
put, put
yeah, let's
in
do
the
it.
description. Yeah. All right, brother. It was good talking to you, man.
Yes, it was.
All right. See, yeah. Let's. Next week we got something. We got something in store, man. It's gonna be good. All right,
Looking
bro.
forward to it.